Well, you're very welcome to the polling station. And unlike it would seem the Labour Party, we are open to everyone. In Jeremy Corbyn, if you're listening in, Jeremy, we're going to talk about you today, and we're going to talk about the future of the SNP with the news that Nicola Sturgeon is obviously stepping down, and then we will cross the Atlantic Ocean to discuss a viable or otherwise contender in the Republican race for the next president's election. But there's only one place to start here, William, and this is the battle to replace Nicola Sturgeon at the top of the SNP. Star Sports has a market. I want to ask you two questions. Why has this happened, and what does this mean for Scottish independence?
Okay, so the why is contested, but I think I can sum it up this way. She is very tired after 8 years as First Minister. She's seen off 4 Prime Ministers. I think it's worth remembering we haven't had a leader serve that long. I don't even think of either of our main parties, basically since Blair era. She's had some political losses. I think that's fair to say. I think the latest fallout over the gender recognition certificate changes have been very difficult for her. I think it's been brutal for the SNP and for her personally. You might possibly say also that she feels, I know she said different, and I'm speculating here, but some people do believe that maybe she thinks the best chance is gone from the indie movement. So those are three of the reasons. And I think, to be honest with you could put lots of things on it because Nicola Sturgeon has been in service a long time. I think her supporters will say she's had some really notable successes, and I would agree with that. But I think there's also been some notable disappointments, and perhaps maybe it's all been too much, and the tank went from full supposedly to empty rather quickly.
So, Paul, I've only ever heard of a politician stepping down because of tiredness twice, and that was in the last couple of weeks, effectively. One of them, obviously, in New Zealand. What do you made of it all?
Well, it's good. It's a good analogy. I think in both cases, we're talking about someone who has had a very successful career, but they've peaked, and it's but they have internal. We see polling; they see far more detailed polling, internal polling. They know which way the wind's blowing, and I think that she's made a smart move there, getting out. It's the only way is down really for the SNP, given how dominant they are. And she's not finished. I mean, she will lead if there is another referendum at some point in the future. She will lead it, okay, and it will probably serve that cause and her cause better if she is out of the front line in politics for the next year, 2 years leading up to that. So I totally understand why she's gone. I didn't foresee it, but it all makes sense. I think that the big winner of this is Labour. I think we talked last week about the Labour majority. We talked many times about the Labour majority. And, I'm not going to overcome my scepticism about Labour winning that number of seats in a country where, as far as I can see, half the country despises Labour. So
it despises, you would say?
Yeah, I would say that. I would say that politics is very much about a love-hate situation nowadays. It's very polarised. And I think it's going to be very hard. Still, it's going to be very hard for them to win in places where they've never won before, never competed before. But they could very well get 20 gains now in Scotland, and that changes a great deal. That makes that majority line a lot more realistic. Maybe you don't have to go and win in places they've never won before. Maybe there is a chance. I also just think that who else could build that coalition in Scotland than Nicola Sturgeon? Who else could build that coalition of very left-wing people, young left-wing idealistic people, and bankers, in short, financiers in Edinburgh? It takes quite a skillful politician to do that, and I'm not convinced that they have anyone that can. Although they have some good candidates, I don't think anyone who can replicate what she's done.
Okay, William, my ears pricked there at the Labour point, because has this, resulted in a revision in that market? And talk to me about the actual market to replace Nicola Sturgeon. I think we're 11 to 10 the field.
Yeah, just on the Labour point, I would agree. I think it's a benefit. At a general election, like you say, she's a tremendous asset, and there's a very big set of shoes to fill. Angus Robertson is 11 to 10. We've shortened him. He started 11 to 8. There's been a bit of a move. He and Kate Forbes are by far the two most popular options in the market. But it's going to be a pretty well contested field. You've got Hamza Yusuf at 7-1, John Swinney 15-2. He's been clipped in a little bit. He was 8th yesterday. Keith Brown 9-1, Mary McCallum 14-1. Then it's 16-1 Ben McPherson and 20-1 Kerry, and there are lots more potential names in the hat. So at the moment, top 2 most popular. I think this will be a more open race than that. Just regarding any change in the general election market, we're now 2's on a Labour majority.
Who's on?
2's on a Labour majority. That was once for the 6. It was also 8-13 around the time, and now it's settled at 2's on.
Okay, how can you explain to me why Star Sports does not have a market at the moment on Scottish independence, which has been up for effectively time immemorial? What does this mean for Scottish independence in your eyes?
Okay, so I think in the short term you might perceive it to be a bit of a blow because basically Sturgeon being a little bit out of the frame, not leaving or exiting stage right, but being a little less prominent due to the position that she has. It might weaken that case just because she's such a good communicator and also because she brings with it a huge amount of attention. She's got that brand that is easy to sell. I think in the medium term, the key factors are still yet to be decided. I think the biggest blow, in a way, this is going to sound really convoluted, but I think Paul can follow me here and sort of see where I'm going. The biggest blow to Scottish independence might have been actually seeing Brexit happen. I get the feeling that the difficulties on so many levels of Brexit might have pulled back a sort of 10 to 15% of people who are leaning towards that they might have balked at it. You know,
I cannot believe you're saying this. Like, I would have been totally of the opposite opinion. And it's interesting you say that. So the complexities right. So the mess that Brexit is and all the complexities and the red tape and the nonsense would put people off change.
So yeah, sort of. It's a weird catch-22 thing because I totally get the argument. We didn't vote for leaving the EU, but we have to be out of the single market and the customs union and all of the other schemes. But at the same time, I think it's very easy to see. I mean, would you look at this? We're apparently like 2 weeks away from some sort of deal on Northern Ireland. Look at the withdrawal agreement. Look at the whole. Anybody remember the whole threats and no deal Brexit? Anybody remember like fridges for blood and all that stuff? I don't think it's a million miles for people to start imagining how would you have a border between here and England? What would you do in terms of finances? Who gets the oil, etc., etc.? And it's also very good campaigning material. But I still think, however, it's absolutely not done, and I still think there will be at least a solid core of support that will keep making that case. And remember, with Brexit, also they sort of started from a lesser base than this. Right? Like, it was a thing people wanted, but it wasn't consistently for years and years and years polling at like, I don't know, 30 or something.
Well, it was a 5 or 6 to 1 shot on the day.
Yeah, right.
You know, so, I mean, I do find that interesting. So if Scotland were to essentially go back to the EU, Paul, this would mean Ireland and Scotland will be the 2 big English-speaking nations in the EU, and all that entails. And obviously, William mentions the oil situation. I would not have thought that Brexit made Scottish independence less likely. The last time I looked, it was roughly 50-50 in terms of the betting. But do you agree with William?
I'm delighted Will's made those points. So 2 things. First of all, of course, just the fact that we are doing a politics podcast and we're thinking about this level makes us unrepresentative. On the substance, I am totally 100% in that place. I understand as well as anybody why a lot of Scottish people do not want to be part of the UK anymore. I get that completely. But Skexit would be an absolute disaster. It would be a nightmare.
Great name.
Yeah, but like, as Will said, remember the division, remember the never-ending, intractable problems that we still haven't solved yet with Brexit. This is far worse. This is far, far worse. Let's get on to the nuclear weapons. Let's get on to keeping the currency stuff. It's bad, right? And I think it would be a terrible thing. Whether that is in the minds of voters, I don't know. right? Because it is quite a detailed point. But I do think it's a reason for me to think that it will never happen, and that even if they do have enough referendum, it will always fall short, because there'll always be too many unanswered questions and too much potential division going forward. I would also, what I would disagree about as well is when you're talking about Brexit, I don't think it is the same dynamic, because the thing about Brexit is that it was 30, 40 years in the making, and the voices that in British public life that powered Brexit are ultra powerful, all powerful even. You know, the Murdoch press, the Mail, the Express. These guys have dominated the conversation in England every day I've been alive, you know. And so when Labour were in, I can remember all the time Labour were in, even though Labour were very pro-European, they were terrified. They were terrified of doing anything, because in case you know, triggered this vast mass of Euroscepticism. Whereas I think that the Scottish independence argument, you know, largely came about because of a Conservative government, a majority Conservative government pushing through austerity, taking absolutely no heed of the opinion of the Scottish people. Whereas we are in a situation now where it's quite easy for Starmer to continue to do this vague thing, where he's just kind of like, you know, well, look, we'll have a better relationship with Scotland, we'll have a better relationship with Europe, we'll come together as a country. And it may not mean that much in substance, but it's a good line, and people will go for it, and you'll be able to get both unionists and nationalists who agree with that.
I find this compelling because obviously somebody, William, who wants United Ireland to happen, I think this is massively relevant. How would you call it if it were to happen, say, if there were a vote in 3 years' time?
United Ireland vote 3 years' time.
A Scottish vote.
Scottish vote. Okay. I'm going very narrowly. Probably favourites. I'm having stay in as favourites. I'm starting that position. I'm not going massive. I'm probably going maybe 4-6, 1-2, 6-4, and then see where the money goes. This is me sort of with a crystal ball, because I think Paul's like a good point. This is all very different with Mr. Reasonable, Sir Keir Starmer. I will come and visit, you know, and it's very easy to imagine Starmer, at least first of all, having sort of acolytes and a shadow cabinet that treats Scotland as a real actual nation and not a joke, right? Or like an extension of the land that they own. And secondly, it's easy to imagine him making the case of give a Labour government time and you will be represented properly. So yeah, I think he can take some of that immediate heat out the fire. I don't necessarily know if he'll be totally successful with it, but there are lots of sort of unknowns, I think, potentially about the Starmer government, and that's one of them. Just regarding who might replace Nicola Sturgeon, or whatever, I get the feeling this could be a rather open race. I think we've got the right favourite, and I can understand why Kate Forbes is in the market, because she's had a meteoric rise. But there are going to be lots of different factors behind who eventually wins. It's going to need to be somebody that is considered to, first of all, have positive assets that they can sell to the electorate. It will have to be somebody who will be seen as a good media performer, etc. I think, you know, not being really opposed to Sturgeon in the past sort of year or so would definitely be a help. And I think also, you know, with Labour, the last time they had their leadership election, I'm still of the opinion Starmer fell in a lot because they thought he was the best sort of correction to Corbyn. I wonder if forces will move to the question of who is the best for a crack at independence in the future, or who is just the best to maintain as many seats as we can in Westminster. And that may lead them to sort of a more experienced candidate like Angus Robertson rather than Kate Forbes, who has risen really quickly, but who some might say is untested at this sort of bigger national level. Briefly, Paul.
Well, I haven't had a bet yet on this market. I'm not going to profess to know much about internal SNP politics. I think the only thing I'd have about Robertson, I think Angus Robertson's a strong candidate. I always thought he was very good in Westminster. But there is an element of me thinking, is this name recognition? Is this because Punt is in England, know Angus Robertson, whereas they don't know the others so well? If I had to have a bet at the current odds, I think it would be Kate Forbes, because she's a candidate on the up, right? And you know that she may well be the most electable of them, but it's not so. I've got a strong opinion. John Swinney, I don't give any prayer to. I mean, there's no way they're going to pick someone who failed a long time ago. Humza Yousaf, I always thought was potentially leadership potential, but he's quite combative. I don't think he'd be that much of a good choice. I think, you know, he's a bit Marmite. So very tentatively, Kate Forbes.
A few things to say, and there's a lot of say. Do you want to come in there, William? Sorry.
Yeah, just on Humza Yousaf, I'd love him so much if it hadn't been for the fact his time at Health has been politically not ideal. I'll try to be diplomatic there. No, he's had a horrible time at Health. I still think, this is the thing, I'm conflicted about it. I still think he's probably a bit overs, but I think for the reasons you put, then also the thing is, the first day that Humza Yousaf becomes Scotland's first minister, this is the guy who led to queues of ambulances, etc. It's almost sort of too easy. There's definitely potential for some proper back to lay thievery here, like massive shenanigans. So yeah, I'd say be aware and read up on your Scottish politicians. And one thing also, don't go for an MP. Don't go for an MP. There'll be some on the list, and don't go for anybody who's not in the SNP because of the nature of the market. Like, there are names there that you wouldn't think should be there because technically they can be according to the rules. It will be an SNP MSP.
Firstly, a couple of things. I love the way when Paul said, I haven't had a bet in this market. You will have just noticed somebody leaving the room behind him as if he or she were to say, yeah, I have no interest in this conversation anymore. And secondly, Paul making the case for Scottish independence by effectively saying the market is dictated by these people in London who they're just going on name recognition. They don't know what's happening on the ground here. Right, I'm going to get to Jeremy Corbyn now because, first of all, I find this whole thing staggering, Will, and the other thing I meant to say is you may have noticed the unionists taking this case that effectively the protocol was against the Good Friday Agreement and against the Act of Union. It's actually very little known that the Act of Union in 1801 was effectively not democratic at all because Catholics couldn't even get into Parliament in Ireland at that time. So the Act of Union itself is based on something that wasn't remotely democratic. And that is what Jeremy Corbyn is effectively accusing the Labour leader of right now. Discuss.
Okay, so first things first, I'm always ceding to you on knowledge of the Act of Union 1801. You learn something every single time you listen.
You literally only could get elected if you were Protestant, and they were effectively bribed to get the thing over the line in the first place. There we are.
There we go. Right, with Corbyn, firstly, whilst it's technically big news, it can't be a surprise, right? This has been discussed, I feel like, almost every 2 to 3 months. There's usually an attack. It's usually at PMQs of Keir Starmer because he was in Corbyn's shadow cabinet, and the line goes, he voted to make Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister, such and such. The Labour Party, ever since he was elected, have guarded very closely against this. The HRC ruling was one of the big factors here. When Corbyn, and I'm not making a judgment on what he said or didn't say, but when he didn't apologise as they wanted to, it was done then. This is just merely the confirmation. Probably happened in recess because Labour wanted to grab the advantage. They probably weren't expecting Sturgeon to go. As to whether it's fair or not, I'm of the belief that it should be a local party's membership that decides it. But I think that for better or for worse, political parties in this country, or at least the Labour Party, they can be controlled to a large degree by their leaders and their acolytes. You see it with the Conservatives. We've seen it with Boris Johnson, the way he took everybody out. We saw it with the way Cameron modernised it. Blair did it. Starmer is now doing it. It's Keir Starmer's Labour Party, right? So no surprise he's not getting back in. As to whether he should, morally, I think you could make the case that he should. I think strategically, it's very hard for Starmer's team to go and say, we're 23 points ahead on average and we're absolutely coasting it, despite the fact you could argue we haven't imprinted our agenda yet. What do we want to do? Bring back one of the people who was the architect of the campaign in which we got absolutely battered. Not in a million years are they going to bring him in and then open themselves up to the attack line. They're going to put Jeremy Corbyn in to run for public office. So no, I'm not surprised. We made Corbyn 11-4 to win, to run and win yesterday. Those odds are down at the moment, but they might come back up. I think there's some open doubt as to whether he runs. I think if he did run, he would be a force. But before I hand over to Paul, because I've been going on a bit, there's a big issue here, which is if Labour are polling this well, where does he get his votes from outside of just his acolytes? And they could throw a big candidate at it. They could throw a lot of people at the seat. It's difficult to win as an indie. Even the most popular name branded politician, and I say that just by name recognition, Farage tried 7 times, couldn't do it. Plenty of others have tried. When those guys went in 2019, they defected or they changed. I don't think anybody got particularly close, really. It's difficult, very difficult.
Okay. This is a difficult one, Paul, obviously, for Keir Starmer, in the sense that he's a slightly polarising figure. Jeremy Corbyn was at a League of Ireland game last year. You're not going to be surprised that I think great things of him. I think Jeremy Corbyn's greatest failure was nothing to do with the anti-Semitic stuff. It was the fact that he was so, blasé on the whole Brexit situation that it completely screwed the Labour Party over, and it was the death of the left, at least for a while, in Britain. What do you mean?
Well, first point, just leaving my personal opinions on Jeremy Corbyn or Labour aside a minute, I do not think he would win that seat. I think Labour will win that seat, whoever they put up. Maybe it will be him. Maybe he will win a war with the party over being like candidate. I don't think so, but it's possible. Look, I could make multiple. I can see multiple sides to the Corbyn argument. Personally, as someone who generally votes Labour and has Labour sympathies, I could not vote for a party that has his childlike position on Ukraine. I just couldn't have it, right? I'm quite confident I could find a 5-year-old who would create a more coherent argument than the one he is about Ukraine should just give up and give away their land because Russia are too powerful. Love to see any situation where he said that, where someone was fighting America or one of America's allies. Remember too, the Labour Party was once described as a daisy chain of hate by a parliamentary sketch writer. And that's what this is. This goes back for decades and decades. There are factions in the Labour Party that despise one another. And yes, what Starmer is doing is definitely undemocratic, right? But really, do you really think that if the hard left were in control of the Labour Party, they'd be tolerating people like Keir Starmer? I mean, it's not so long ago that anybody who said anything vaguely good about New Labour got screamed centrist, neoliberal, corporate warmonger and all that rubbish. So it's the nature of the beast. It's a very divided. The left is permanently divided, and Corbyn had his chance. He failed it miserably. Can't really complain that the new leadership want rid of him.
Well, beat that, Will.
It's not a competition. No, listen, I would agree with quite a few of the points Paul made there. I mean, looking at it purely analytically, right, we're trying to find out what the chances are, assuming he runs, of him actually winning. And we've got some recent history, right? Since 1945, there have been 9 incumbent MPs. They switched parties between elections, and they've held their seats, right? 3 were Indie, 4 were Social Democrats, 1 was a Democratic Labour MP. The latest was the UKIP Douglas Carswell. That's probably like the best pound-for-pound comparison. It's possible for Corbyn to do this for a couple of reasons. Number 1, extremely long service, right? Number 2, extremely high name brand recognition. Number 3, a passionate enough group of people to go and hit the ground running in a seat that is more left-leaning and more socially liberal than the rest of the UK as a whole. What is against him is basically the pure power that political parties have in terms of elections for parliament in this country. And essentially what you need to do is you need to weigh up the factors of what can Labour throw at this seat, not to mention, of course, just the Labour vote that is there because it's Labour, sticking a rosette on a pig, etc., the old tale, versus the amount of goodwill that Jeremy Corbyn can mobilise in his seat. It's clearly very high. It's probably the highest of any given MP, I'd say, in this situation. But I think his task is made much harder by 2 things. Number 1, Labour we're doing a bit of crystal ball gazing, but Labour likely to be safe, even 15, 20 points ahead. It's really difficult to cut into that lead. He's popular with some. He's popular with Labour voters, I think, just overall, but not by a huge amount, not as it used to be. And then secondly, also resource. Labour can throw 10 of every £1 he might be able to spend in that, and that counts an awful lot. The average price of winning a seat is like 12 grand in itself. For marginals and contests, it goes to more like 100k, and that's also something to consider.
Okay, we've got less than a minute left. Very, very briefly, William. Nikki Haley, is this a goer or is it not?
Not a goer, more of a VP bid, I imagine. I don't think it will have much difference. So let's just see where it goes. But the thing is, it's already been pre-briefed. We've talked about it. The actual official announcement wasn't really an announcement, in my opinion.
Paul?
I've laid her at 25s. I think Will's right. She's VP. She's Trump or DeSantis VP.
That person's just going to come back in the room. His or her ears is going to prick. I've laid her at 25s. This is what you want. This is why you listen to the polling station, hearing 1.04 shots that cannot be beaten. We've discussed a lot today. We'll be back next week.